actually. So if you're grounded in your values, and I do think I am, you're not going to be seduced by people who are just nice to you, right? Like, I actually really respect the fact that the right is welcoming, that they are willing to, forgive past transgressions and say, hey, we will take you in with open arms. Not everyone on the right, but generally speaking, that is what I noticed. Whereas with the left, there seems to be this weird obsession with exclusivity, purity, and purging people who are, heterodox or whatever. And so I've noticed quite a bit of that on the left. But I really do value who I am as a person, and I just don't think that I'm going to change my political views entirely based on who's mean to me or who's nice to me. But I will say this, I don't know if it's a strategy or if it's just who right-wingers happen to be, but their willingness to welcome people is honestly how you build power. It really is. And the left just fails to realize that. I don't know why they want to treat politics as if it's like this cutesy little exclusive club, but that's certainly how they treat it. But then there's also this paradox, because you look at the current Democratic Party, like Kamala Harris's campaign, for instance, and she's like luring in the who's who of Bush era Republicans. And I don't like those folks. I don't like neocons. I think that, in fact, I became politicized when the neocons were in charge during the Bush administration. And the idea that I now have to just hold my nose and support Kamala Harris, even as she is talking about the value of having Dick Cheney endorse her and campaign with her, it just like grosses me out. So it's like a weird paradox, because while I'm being trashed pretty viciously, there's like this insane support for what the Democratic Party is doing in bringing in never Trump Republicans. It's almost like Trump is at the center of everything.
It certainly feels that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, if you're an enemy of Trump's, then you are welcome.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are someone who believes in a lot of left-wing policies, but you're critical in certain ways, well, you're not pure enough. We're going to purge you. We're going to purge you.
Where does that degree of purity come from?
I have no idea.
Have you tried to think about sort of what this mechanism is, this underlying dynamic?
It could be fear, right? Fear of betrayal. I think that, one thing that has really given me some clarity about what drives people is Jonathan Haidt's work when it comes to moral foundations. I love that book. I loved Coddling of the American Mind too. That was an excellent book as well. But what I appreciated about that is I was able to learn about my own inherent biases. And also I was able to learn what moral foundations the left has that leads to certain behaviors and certain beliefs. So the left tends to score very low on loyalty. And so that was really interesting. I took the test. I don't know how accurate it is, but I scored the absolute highest in loyalty. And so it's just, when I see members of the left publicly trashing each other, like prominent figures publicly trashing each other in bad faith specifically, it really disgusts me. It genuinely does. And even as all of these various public figures on the left are trashing me right now, I'm not going to do that on my show. Like, I haven't done that on TYT. I'm not going to do that on TYT, because it's just, the whole thing grosses me out. It's just not who I am. So I think moral foundations might play a role in the different behaviors that you're seeing on the left and the right.
I understand what you mean about this fear, and especially the loyalty point, that I often think that if you know one of someone's opinions and from it you can accurately predict everything else that they believe, even though they might not genuinely believe it, you have this reliable model that kind of projects out where Ana, we don't need to worry about Ana, she was on board with X, Y, and Z last time. But if you're this sort of perfect round sphere, we know that if we roll you where you're going to go. But if you've got a couple of little sort of chinks out of you and a couple of dents and divots, you go, well, hang on, she didn't quite agree with us so much on that. So she's like an unreliable ally moving forward. I'm not so sure that I actually do trust her on this thing. So rather than potentially put your faith in someone who is with you most of the time, but not all of the time, it's easier to just cast you out. But even though you said, you're not, your political allegiance doesn't lie with whoever is nicest to you, you can certainly see the dynamic of how people would feel put off by the left's distaste. It's all well and good saying, I don't go just where people want me, but it's very hard to stay somewhere where people don't want you.
That's 100% true. Yeah, I do think that the right is winning. I think there's a reason why, if you look at voter registration, for the first time, there are fewer registered Democrats in America compared to, registered Republicans. But that's not because they're registering as Republicans. It's because they're no longer registering as Democrats and just they're independent voters. They consider themselves independent voters. That's a problem within the Democratic Party that I think they need to come to terms with and maybe change their behavior so it stops happening. But
Less
the thing that's
exclusionary,
been
less elitist.
exactly, and it's actually been the most shocking to me that they are unwilling to recalibrate in any way, ever.
Every single person I know who I'm friends with from the left, this is probably their number one gripe internally. And it's the thing that everybody has to sort of say quietly. Like, I can't actually talk about it fully, because even calling out the fact that there is an elephant in the room is enough of a problem to cause you to be casting that the unreliable ally radar kicks off. One other dynamic that I really wanted to get your take on that I thought is interesting. We do sometimes see people slide away from the more extreme versions of the left, right? There's been a variety of arcs where people have gone fully from left to right or from left to center or whatever. We've very rarely seen people go in the other direction. Why do you think that is?
I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think it's to the same extent as someone going from left to right. But I mean, there had been people who, claimed that they had been de-radicalized and now they're Democrats, right? I forget the name of this guy. His name was David Weissman, I think it might have been, but he was a hardcore Trump supporter. He was on Twitter and he was, tweeting, I guess, negative things. And Chelsea Handler, of all people, decided to be nice to him. And she de-radicalized him. But like, that goes back to what we were saying, right? Like, for some people, those dynamics really do mean a lot to them. So if someone is willing to be kind to you, even if they have a different political opinion, and if they're willing to have a conversation with you, well, there is an opportunity for persuasion there. And I wish the left overall realized that, right? These people are not our enemies. I'm talking about voters here. I'm not talking about, people in positions of power. When it comes to ordinary Americans, these people should not be viewed as our enemies because they think differently than us. They should be viewed as our fellow Americans participating in something that we're supposed to value, which is our democratic process. So if we stop treating them like they're pariahs and we actually are willing to have good faith conversations with them, there are opportunities for persuasion. Maybe there aren't. Maybe they're not willing to be persuaded, and that's fine. But this idea that we should cut ourselves off from anyone who thinks a little differently from us, that is a losing strategy.
Yeah.
It just is.
They're certainly not going to be persuaded if you just castigate them the second that they try and talk to you. Yeah, you can disagree with your own side, but if the other side rejects you too, you go, okay, well, I guess I am politically homeless. I am just sat in the middle now because there isn't anywhere for me to go. It does seem oddly like a kamikaze ideology for the future of a party if you continue to spiral the purity round and round and shave off the people who don't wholeheartedly take on board the things that you want. And you mentioned earlier on when you guys, some of your audience had thought that you'd pushed too far on Trump and that had been sort of disaffecting to them. They'd felt like it wasn't maybe as objective previously. Do you think that the audience that you've built now is ready to hear you with an alternative perspective? What's that been like?
This has been, my evolution, if you want to call it that, has not happened overnight. I mean, this has been a slow, painful thing that's been happening for a few years now. And so I think that the audience members who were not interested in this evolution have already left, and they've found, programming that makes them feel comfortable, programming that they like, and that's great. That's their right. The people who have stayed behind, Some of them are still very critical, but I really respect them. And it's okay that they're critical. I'm willing to take their criticism because they are willing to hear me out. They are willing to hear what I have to say. They're willing to hear opinions that might differ from theirs. And I have tremendous respect for anyone who has that kind of mindset. So I love my audience. I'm very grateful for the audience we have. And I'm, sad that there was, a small portion of our, audience who decided to leave, but that's their prerogative. And I'm not going to continue to be in some sort of like ideological prison to appease people. I want to find what the reality is. And I'm going to get things wrong still.
Hmm.
But I also want to be honest about when I do get things wrong, and I want to correct myself, and I want to build the trust that I feel that for a few years I just didn't deserve.